Welcome friends, it's Ray. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today's video is a part of the Card Crafters collaborative hop on YouTube, hosted by Robin, the Delta Crafter. The theme is Hello Summer. I will link in the description bar below to the next person in the hop, so please be sure to check out all of my crafty friends. For my card today, I am using a sheet of just regular copy paper that's cut to 4.5 by 6.5. I am making an A7 5x7 card today, and I've cut some strips of cardstock in rainbow colors. These are all Hero Arts cardstocks. I've cut 3 pieces of Cranberry, the red, and then 2 pieces of everything else, and I'm using Canary, pumpkin, Kiwi, Paradise, and Amethyst. I cut the strips to a 1/2 inch wide, and I have placed my copy paper on my mat, lining that up, and so that I can use that to align each of my strips to my copy paper. I'm using craft tacky glue to affix each strip, and I'm going to affix these in rainbow order. Now once I get my first strip affixed, then it's fairly easy from there. I can just butt my remaining strips up against that first one. And I'm just again using the lines on my grid mat to make sure that I place my glue within that 1/2 inch square. And then I can just go ahead and alternate my colors. Now that I have my first set of cardstock strips affixed, I'm going to start over with my red and again go in that same order. And I'm going to do this all the way down my panel. And once done, I am going to go ahead and flip that over and use my paper trimmer to trim off each edge. I am using the Wild Columbine stamp and die bundle from Hero Arts, and I have used the die to cut out the floral columbine from my panel. And now I'm placing my panel into a 3D embossing folder by Creative Expressions. I will be sure to list that below. So here I have added foam tape to the back of my panel and partially removed the release paper, but I added craft tacky glue on top of the exposed foam tape so that when I place it on my mat, black mat, I have wiggle room to kind of readjust it and get it aligned just the way I want it. Then I can go ahead and remove the remaining release paper. Here I'm going to remove just a sliver off of this side. And here's a visual of me adding the double-sided tape to the back of my panel. This is exactly what I did with the foam tape from when I placed it on my main panel. What I like to do is partially remove the release paper from my tape, but not all the way, just partially remove that. And then now I'm starting to place some craft tacky glue on top of that tape, and this is to give me wiggle room to make sure I get my panel affixed. I can move it without it sticking instantly. And the reason I use double-sided tape is because my Wild Columbine floral is popped up on foam squares, and so it would make it a little more difficult to affix, strongly affix to my card base. Because my panel is raised, it's going to be a little trickier to get my glue to adhere. It's certainly possible, but this makes it a little easier. So that's why I use the double-sided tape. Once I have this ready, then I will go ahead and affix it to my card base. I have placed a piece of 40-pound basil vellum in my MISTI and prepped it for heat embossing with my anti-static powder tool. I also have my Wild Columbine stamp in my MISTI and am going to apply Versamark clear embossing ink to it. And I'm going to stamp this about 3 times to make sure I get a good impression, because it's really hard to see whether I got a good impression on this vellum, but I will do my best. I am using Alabaster White embossing powder by Brutus Monroe. It is a fine detail embossing powder. I'm using my dry paintbrush to remove embossing powder from areas that I don't want it. I let my heat gun heat up on the side. Very important with the vellum, because you don't want to have the heat on the vellum any longer than you need to. And I always start at the very back and let this heat up, and then last few seconds bring it to the front, and that should be enough to make sure everything is melted. I find that I get less warping this way. After this cools for a few seconds, I'm going to go ahead and use the die from the bundle to cut out my flower. And I am taping this down with some low-tack purple tape, and then I will place a piece of copy paper over top and run this through my die cutting machine. The reason I placed the copy paper over top is because my plates are pretty, I guess, worn. I do need to replace them, and so I don't want to get indentations in my vellum where I don't want them. I used my Simon Says Stamp Micro Dots adhesive sheet to apply micro adhesive dots all over my vellum. I placed my floral on top of my micro dots and used my bone folder to rub it in. Looks like my camera wasn't on, sorry about that. And so what I'm doing here is just placing glue on all of the edges and trying to make sure to keep it on top of the stamped areas so that it doesn't look like it's seeping through. I heat embossed my sentiment with white embossing powder and applied it to my panel off camera. I did use my Ranger multi-medium matte glue because it's a thinner glue, and I didn't want it to ooze out on the sides, and so now I'm just placing this inside of my panel, and it's going to be recessed whereas my panel is raised on the foam tape. I used pops of color in lemon chiffon to make some enamel dots in advance, and now I'm just going to glue them to the center of each flower. I actually switched from my embellishment wand to my tweezers as I was able to get a better grip on these little dots. I did make 2 cards with this design. Now here's a look at the second card I made. I debossed with my embossing folder versus with this one I embossed. And so the reverse of my embossing folder, I stamped my image on white cardstock with Hero Arts Intensified Black ink, and then put the lemon chiffon on the center of the flowers and a few on the panel. On my second card, my panel is flat to my mat, but my floral is raised and popped up on foam tape, so the opposite of the first card. So you can see the two here. Let me know in the comments which one you prefer. I think this one with the vellum floral is my favorite, but I like this one too with the white cardstock, because with all the color in the background you can get away without coloring your image, and I'm not always in the mood to color, or I may not always have time to color, so these are my two options for not coloring the florals. Be sure to stop by the YouTube channels for all of my crafty friends in the hop. I hope you liked today's video and will give me a big thumbs up. As always, thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, good day, friends.